Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm Lori Clemmo, president of DeUville College. We're excited to welcome you to DeUville and to welcome you to the Health Systems of the Future Conference. We know it's going to be a fascinating and interesting panel this afternoon, and it really is a topic that touches each one of us in some way. We hope that you, our panelists, will be describing for us a future that includes making healthcare more available to more people at drastically reduced prices through more shared data, more mobile technology, and by first and foremost, putting patients at the heart of your business. Like you in healthcare, for those of us in education, we too aspire to create a future educational system for our customers or our students that includes increased access to education at a more affordable price, where and when they demand it, through improved technologies over the course of their lifetime, and by keeping students at the center of our work. It's a challenge, not impossible. We know you're up to it as well as we are. I would first like to welcome and thank for being with us this afternoon our keynote speaker, Dr. Josh Luke. It's an honor to have you here with us at DeUville and in Western New York. Thank you for being here, and thank you for sharing your futuristic thinking on healthcare and the organizations that deliver it. I am also extremely pleased to have join us today a panel of the very best and brightest, and in sports terms, what we might refer to as the top draft picks, first string, or A-team of Western New York's healthcare systems and organizations. Together, these remarkable individuals have helped create Buffalo's reputation as the Silicon Valley of healthcare. Through their work and their vision, they are building an unprecedented opportunity for our community to witness great advances in health innovation and technologies, and to receive care that is improving and extending lives like never before. DeUville is proud to call each of our panelists a close community partner that helps us educate the next generation of highly skilled, compassionate healthcare leaders that are dedicated to always keeping patients top of mind. I look forward to harnessing your words of wisdom about the future and how best to prepare our students for what looks to be a fascinating and hopeful era of healthcare. Thank you to our sponsors, the Health Foundation of Western and Central New York, for making this event possible for our community. And again, welcome to DeUville.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Lisa Raffleson. I'm the chair of the Health Services Administration Department at DeUville College. I'm so thrilled that we filled the room. This evening's event is a long time in the making. It's taken the ongoing effort of many people in multiple departments at DeUville College to make this happen, and I want to thank all of you for your contributions. Events like this also take a lot of resources to pull off. That's why we were so pleased to partner with the Health Foundation for Western and Central New York as our main sponsor. Thank you. I thank them for their support, and I hope today's event will be just the first in an enduring partnership to share important topics like this in Western New York. I also want to thank the Health Executive Forum and the Academic Resource Committee at DeUville College for their important support. Molly Flynn and Erica Morley-Soto in DeUville College's Office of Professional Development, as well as my Health Services Administration colleagues, most notably Barbara Schweitzer, were integral to the success and planning and implementation of tonight's program. Thank you for your commitment to this event. I first heard Josh Luke speak last summer at a conference in Long Beach, California. He gave the keynote address and told a very personal story of how the healthcare system failed him and his grandmother. He shared his poignant story through the lens of both a healthcare administrator and a family member. His book, Execute, you'll find a copy of this in your tote bag, shares lessons learned from the perspective of being a hospital administrator. Dr. Luke, through his own experiences as a sports marketer, a nursing home administrator, and 10 years as a hospital CEO, has an insider's knowledge of healthcare executive management. He contributes columns to both Forbes and Fortune, writing as an authority on healthcare affordability. And he's well regarded as a healthcare futurist, one uniquely informed by the past. But I think you'll hear more about that during his presentation. So let's set the context for tonight's discussion about the U.S. healthcare system. I think we can all agree that healthcare is in crisis, or at the very least, we're at a crossroads. According to the most recent estimates, the cost of healthcare in the United States is $3.5 trillion. No, you heard that right. $3.5 trillion, 18% of our gross domestic product. As a comparison, in 1980, the total healthcare costs were $27 billion. Still a lot of money. But just to give you an idea of a sense of the magnitude of that, let's look at an analogy in terms of time. Okay? Stay with me. 1 billion seconds would take about 31 years to elapse. 1 trillion seconds would take about 31,709 years to elapse. It's a lot. Other developed countries spend far less on health care and yet have better health outcomes than we do in the United States. Our nation lags behind others in the most basic health indicators like infant mortality and life expectancy. The American healthcare system has to change, and it will. It already is. Some of the nation's most powerful international companies like J.P. Morgan Chase, Berkshire Hathaway, and Amazon have emerged to tackle the healthcare crisis, even though they have no experience in healthcare. They've got the means and the might, which could make up for their lack of experience. Tonight, Dr. Luke will address the national perspective on these issues, and some of those that Dr. Clemo also mentioned. And then our panelists will also speak to the local situation. After Dr. Luke concludes, I'll return to the stage to invite the panelists to take their seat on the stage. Please join me now in thanking in advance Dr. Luke and our panelists, Jody Lomeo, Nora O'Brien-Surik, Tom Quattrochi, and CJ Erlub. And now, let's give a warm Buffalo welcome to Dr. Josh Luke.
Is that remote up here somewhere? Thank you. Thanks so much. Wow, what an awesome crowd. I'm sitting there listening to my bio going, these folks must be really confused. Sports marketing? What's a healthcare futurist anyway? So we're going to talk about those things today, but I'm so glad to be here with you. And what an honor, first, that I was invited to be the keynote speaker a year or so ago for all of the American healthcare administration educators from university, and then to meet so many of them, like Lisa, and to be invited here is such an honor. So I want to thank Dr. Clemo, I want to thank Nora for sponsoring the Health Foundation, and everybody else for having me. And we're going to have a lot of fun in the next hour, and then I can't wait to moderate the panel, because the executives that I got a chance to speak to backstage, there are some amazing things going on here in Buffalo, and I can't wait to talk a little bit more about them. I was looking out the window at my hotel this morning, and I've never been to Buffalo before. My son played in the Cooperstown baseball tournament a couple of years ago, and I was the coach. And when my wife came over to console me, she said, "I'm so sorry we lost. It was Thursday, right? And we're supposed to be there till Sunday." And I said, "Honey, you know we already booked a room at Niagara Falls for tonight, right? I knew we were going to lose." Don't tell anybody, I'm the coach, right? I have to act sad for another 20 minutes. So we drove up to Niagara Falls and did, of course, everybody said, stay on the Canada side, bring your passports. Had a great night there and drove back to upstate New York. Interesting story. That was just about 5 years ago. There was a police car parked under every bridge between here and Cooperstown. And it turns out we figured out because President Obama at the time was going from Binghamton up here to speak. So that's my Buffalo story. I just missed it. But about 10 minutes ago, I was looking out the window earlier at my hotel, and I saw the baseball stadium. And I just texted my brother, who's a professional baseball player for years, and I had in the back of my head, I have a baseball card of my brother that says Buffalo Bisons, but did he ever play for Buffalo? So I texted him, right? Don't clap yet. I texted him, and literally I'm over there, playing with my phone going, text back, hurry. And I said, hey, did you ever play for Buffalo, the Bisons? And he says, no, but I learned about what lake effect rain is when I was playing for the Columbus Clippers against Buffalo in the International League Championship, and they had us run to the dugout. No rain before that, and he said, is this true? Within 2 minutes, there was 12 inches of rain in the dugout. So he said, I will never forget Buffalo, and I learned about lake effect rain. So that's my Buffalo story. And now let's talk about healthcare and its future, okay? I love to start with these two slides, this slide in particular, because it shows you two things about me. It shows you my diverse background in healthcare, so you can understand a little bit about how my perspectives were shaped. But it also shows you that I can't keep a job for very long, doesn't it? So I was blessed to become a hospital CEO at age 32, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about that story. It was a real blessing. But this just shows you I started my career in healthcare as a nursing home administrator, and then was recruited to go be the administrator of a hospital. That might seem like a really big leap, and it was. But what happened was this small community hospital had 4 nursing homes right across the street, driveway to driveway, right? And those nursing homes had lost confidence in that hospital. They wouldn't even send the patients. So the hospital's COO was a nursing home administrator by trade, and he convinced the CEO to say, hey, we need to go get a nursing home administrator that understands how to get patients out of those buildings over here so we can keep this old hospital going because it's a community hospital, right? And so they gave me a chance to be the CEO of a hospital, and I might not be as naive as you think. I said to them, wait a minute, give me a few specific goals. I've never worked in a hospital, and you're about to make me the CEO. That's cool and everything, but let me know what I'm getting into, right? And so they gave me 4 objectives, and 3 of them were about working with physicians to fill beds to drive revenue. And I'm happy to say I took that job. We were able to accomplish a couple of those goals in 2 months, and then the third one in 6 months. The fourth one we never quite got to. It was probably unreachable. But the point being, after 4 years on that job, I got recruited to go be the CEO of another hospital in the same town of Anaheim. If any of you have ever been to Disneyland before and I look familiar to you, it's probably because you came to my emergency room. I will tell you, my employees always said, hey, what's the book on Josh, the CEO? He's always on the floor. We wish he would just go back to his office. So I spent a lot of time in the emergency rooms, but that's a little bit of my story. But here's what happened after 3 years at that new hospital in Anaheim. New owner comes in, and everybody patted me on the back and said, hey, man, you've been here 3 years. You've doubled the average hospital CEO tenure. You're out the door. Go look for a job. We'll pay you for a while, so don't worry about it. And my wife and I ended up moving to Las Vegas to take a new job as the CEO of an acute rehab hospital. Now, what was interesting about that is I started my career in healthcare in the post-acute side. After 7 years on the acute side, now I find myself back out on the post-acute side. But one major thing happened in the interim. The Affordable Care Act passed. And now, instead of being trained in a methodology where all of us were just trained to put a head in a bed and we get paid and everybody wins, now we're talking about value-based care and keeping people out of the hospital. But what really dawned upon me, being back out on the outside, was that I'd become part of the problem because after 7 years on the acute side, the acute sector had total, utter disrespect still for the post-acute side. You want me to give you an example before you get offended? Those 4 nursing homes across the street from the hospital, when you go to visit them, ask them the last time anybody from that hospital has ever been there. The answer will be never. Well, they've only been there 20 years. Give them a break. It's only driveway to driveway. But let me ask you this in defense. And anytime I say something offensive, remember, I'm one of you. I'm a hospital CEO. I'm a nursing home administrator. I ran a home health. Remember, I couldn't keep a job. So I'm one of you. I'm just telling it how it is. That's why they call me a truth teller, okay? So in defense of the hospital, why would we have cared what went on in post-acute? In the fee-for-service era, we put a head in a bed, we get paid, we send them home, and if they come back the next day, we high-five and say, thanks, I'm going to build a government for you again. And that was the problem, wasn't it? Fee-for-service was a model with no checks and balances whatsoever. And converting to value-based care is about going to a model with checks and balances. So let's take a step back and talk about why I became a patient advocate. 3 really cool things happened to me in 1998. I got married to my awesome wife, Martine, and yes, I know it's 20 years. I got something planned. Don't worry. I achieved my career dream of working in sports marketing. My 2 older brothers are both professional athletes. That's a lot of pressure for a high school kid, isn't it? And sometime when I was sitting on the bench watching my teammates play basketball my senior year, I realized that God might not have blessed me in the same way. So I set my sights on working in sports marketing instead of being on the field. And so I achieved my career dream in 1998. Most of you who are non-millennials will remember that Mark McGuire broke the home run record that year. He hired my firm to come and do all his marketing. And so when the season got over, we took a cool trip I'm going to tell you about. But you know what the other third thing that happened that year was? That was cool. My brother made it to the major leagues with the Los Angeles Dodgers, my favorite team. And the only uncool thing that happened that year is I gained so much weight from drinking beer and eating hot dogs at Dodger Stadium every night. But it was a dream come true. What a year, right? So check this out. So I'm at work. Mark McGuire comes to meet us finally because the season gets over and he lives in Southern California. He comes back to LA where I'm from, and we're in Orange County. And even though I grew up watching the guy, and I talked to him on the phones 3 or 4 times in the last couple of weeks since he hired us sight unseen. And we were telling him, hey, here's what's best for you and your reputation. When he walked in, I mean, he was a giant, right? I mean, you're like, whoa, dude, you're even bigger than on TV. Well, we were a marketing and public relations firm. And Mark had said to us, I don't want to do any media when the season gets over. I just want to go home and be with my family. The media's been everywhere for months. And we said, hey, Mark, that's cool, but we want to share 2 things with you. Sammy Sosa looks really nice and jovial right now, even though you broke the record and you look grumpy. And our firm is paid to be a marketing firm, a publicist for you. So we're going to tell you what you should do, and if you don't want to do it, we can't make you do it. We're going to go to New York the day before Game 3 of the World Series. We're going to take you on a media tour. They're going to show your public service announcement for child abuse, to fight child abuse during Game 3. We're going to come home, and you're done for the whole offseason, and we'll make sure your face is everywhere. He said, okay. And then he walked out, and my boss looks at me, and he goes, you know I can't go that day, right? I'm doing the Bellagio grand opening that day, and that's my account. And he says, and you can't go because you're getting married 2 days early. And I said, hold on. I'm not married yet, and I'm going to go home and use the art of persuasion here for a few minutes. So I went home to my fiancée at the time, and I said, honey, you know how you've never been to New York? What do you think about pushing our honeymoon back a day or 2? And I've already got approval for you to go. We will go on a private jet. I've never dreamed of being on a private jet before. While I'm taking Mark to the David Letterman show and the Today Show and the Rosie O'Donnell show and to Time Magazine, you can go shopping. And then I said something I don't think I've ever said again in 20 years. I said, I will even give you money to go shopping, right? So needless to say, presentation's everything. And she said, let's do it. So we go on this flight. Amazing, amazing time. 24 hours later, we're back on a flight home. That's the last time I've ever been on a private jet. It was pretty cool, but I looked across at my wife. I've been married 3.5 days. And I looked at her and I said, this is so amazing. I'm 26 years old. We're living the dream. We're doing this. But I've just gotten a different perspective in the last week or 2. Now that I'm married, this is real. And working in sports marketing doesn't do a lot for me. And where do I go from here? Private jet, most famous athlete in the world. I'm feeling unfulfilled, and I feel like I need to start researching a different career path. And what I didn't know at the time, my wife's looking at me like, did you quit your job? You know? No, honey. Too young for a midlife crisis, so it wasn't that. I just wanted a career that had more of a social mission. I didn't even know what it was. But you know what? I got my answer a few months later. Before I tell you what that answer was, here's a picture of me on October 19th, 1998, with my wife and Mark McGuire and Dave Letterman. Pretty cool. That same day I told her I wanted a new career path. Well, about 6 months later, I was teaching at a university in Nevada when I was getting my PhD. And one of my students approached me and said, hey, I have heard you say you want a career change. I have heard you talk about your frustrations with your grandmother's care. Well, what she was referring to is The week of my wedding, I hadn't seen my grandmother in a while. I grew up with my grandma across the street. She was awesome. Grandma and Grandpa worked hard. They both always had a few jobs. But the week of my wedding, when she's in town, you know how all the relatives are camping out on your couch the whole week? She's saying, man, I can't get into my doctor. My wheelchair's broken. They haven't sent me a walker. And remember, I'm just a sports marketing dude. None of that, man. I'm only 26. I'm not into any of that stuff. I don't know anything about it. But what I do know is Grandma and Grandpa both had jobs their whole life. They should have good insurance. Why is it so difficult for her to just get basic care? And that had really been pulling at my strings for a while. And when the student came and said, I've heard you talk about wanting a change. I've heard you talk about your grandma. We have an opening at our nursing home for an administrator in training, and I think you'd be perfect for it. So long story short, I took that job. And I had an amazing, amazing training session with this nursing home company, Life Care Centers of America. They wanted me to train for 2 years. I'm like, man, I only got to do it for 6 months. Why 2 years? But it was awesome. They made me work. They made me, so I threw that in there, made me work in the laundry department for 3 weeks. They made me work in activities for 3 weeks. They made me work in engineering. I remember going on the roof going, what in the world am I going on the roof? Students, let me tell you, you'll learn more going on the roof than you'll learn probably in any other department of the hospital. It's crazy what's going on up there. I worked 3 weeks in the kitchen. And in the kitchen, I'm only allowed to wash dishes, right? I'm not allowed to cook. You got to get certifications for that. So I'm in Nevada, and the cook is an immigrant making minimum wage, $5.25 an hour at the time, with 3 children and a wife at home that doesn't work. And all he's thinking is, why is the guy in the suit in here washing dishes? Am I in trouble? Am I busted? And no matter how many times I said, no, man, it's part of my training. He goes, you don't need to be trained to wash dishes. Get out of here. Every day, same thing, right? He's like, oh, you're back again? Here's what I learned. I learned more from him through observation than I learned the whole rest of the program. And I want to share with you two or three things I learned about being a healthcare leader. Number one, I learned that everybody working in a nursing home loves their residents, and that's why we're there. Because about once a day, he would walk over to the door. Some days he wouldn't even see the residents, right? Just crack the door and look at it, get a big smile on his face. And that inspired me. The other thing I learned from him, the second of the 3 things, is I could probably take some financial management lessons from him. Most of us probably could. Minimum wage, 3 kids, happy as can be. But the third thing I learned, I think, is the most important thing a young administrator in training could learn, which was this. More people that work under the roof of a healthcare facility can relate to the minimum wage cook than will ever relate to the person in the corner office in the suit. And that was the most important lesson I could learn early, and I'm so glad I learned it. Because as a hospital CEO, I told you earlier, I was on the floor all the time to the point people didn't like it. In the first couple weeks, I would always be down there shaking hands. And inevitably, by the time I was at my 3rd job, we can be honest, I can't keep a job, okay? By the way, do you know the best thing about working for yourself? You can say whatever you want without getting in trouble, right? That's why I'm a public speaker for a living. So now that I work for myself, I look back on being a hospital CEO, and inevitably, within the first 3 days, somebody would walk in and go, everybody's really impressed that you're shaking hands with the engineers and the housekeepers and treating them just as you would anybody else. I'm shocked to hear that people are impressed by that, because that's just common sense and human nature. But what it told me is there were other leaders that didn't understand that basic human nature, right? So as you evolve as a leader, remember to keep those things in check. And those lessons I learned at a young age are so important. So my grandmother eventually passed away. But the last summer of her life, she was in and out of the hospital, long-term acute care hospitals. Now, I know New York doesn't have any of those, right? I learned that in my journey. But most of the nation has long-term acute care hospitals. The average length of stay is 25 days. It's an ICU. It's full of infection. It's a place every American wants to spend 3.5 weeks, right? So Grandma went there, and then she went to a nursing home, then she went home. And I always joke that after being in a home 3 weeks, she fell and broke her hip again. And if you listened really closely, you could hear a collective cheer from all the providers in the community, because we get to bill for her again. It's the fee-for-service, free-for-all. Grandma's coming back. Hospital bills for her, doctor bills for her. That doctor, guess what? Medical director at the LTAC. 25 days for Grandma at the LTAC. No coincidence. He or she's also the medical director at the nursing home down the street. Raise your hand really quickly. They always tell you as you're training to be a public speaker, be careful with audience participation. They don't like being put on the spot, but I'm going to put you on the spot. Raise your hand if you personally can't wait for the day you get to be admitted to a convalescent home for the rest of your life. Now, the hospital folks here know I just set them up. The rest of you are just laughing because it's a fact and it's common sense, isn't it? Because here's what happened during the fee-for-service era, and I'm taking responsibility as a CEO because every morning at 9 a.m. I walked into my case management office and said, link to stay, these 4 patients need to be out. Because in the fee-for-service era, and that was the name of the Pre-Affordable Care Act era, we were paid a fee for providing a service. And if the patient's needs were billed and we got $17,240, we got paid $17,240 whether they were there 3 days or 10 days, right? And we look at our cost per day. So as a manager, length of stay was our key focus. So every morning I'd walk into the case management office. They knew why I was there. They had a list of 4 or 5 names they knew I was already going to ask about. And here's what happened. Oh, that patient has Medicare? Send him to a nursing home. Next. Boss is happy. That was a quick one. Oh, this patient has Medicare too. Send him to a nursing home. Ah, sweet. This patient has Medicare too. Oh, it says here that the family has requested the patient doesn't go to a nursing home. Well, guess what? Every family in America has requested that. This just happens to be the one that our social worker caught it on, right? So I will take responsibility for becoming part of the problem. What I just described to you during the fee-for-service era is that as providers that got reimbursed for putting a head in a bed, we took the path of least resistance to get those patients out of our hospital to the next level of care, wash our hands of it, it's your problem. It wasn't anybody's problem, right? Because for some reason, as Americans, we don't feel empowered to ask our doctor for a second opinion. In fact, we're embarrassed to do that, aren't we? I'm going to step down here and get a little closer to y'all because I want to share a few things with you. The way I first became known as a speaker is because I was speaking in San Diego in 2011 and 12, and somebody came up to me and said, hey, have you heard about readmission prevention? I said, yeah. And they said, you talked about it in a manner I've never heard anybody talk about it, because you were a nursing home administrator before you became a hospital CEO, and that's pretty rare. And I knew it was rare because all the hospital CEOs looked down on me when I was a young CEO. They didn't even know my name. But then my phone started ringing. Hey, Josh, old buddy. It's 2013 now, and I'm thinking, where'd this guy learn my name? I know he didn't know it when I used to go to those meetings with him. My board wants me to do a presentation on readmission prevention. Can you just give me 3 quick bullets to tell them so they'll move on to the next thing? I heard you're the readmission guy. Okay. The best part was that so I can move on to the next thing, right? I'm going to share with you a couple of the punchlines now so you don't have to wait a half hour. Almost every hospital CEO I know will say, I'm fine with readmissions. I just don't want to be over the limit because then I'm penalized. It's capitalism. That's a fact. Why would they say anything otherwise? Here's the next thing you need to know. I got a book about readmission prevention. I started a website, a not-for-profit, called the National Readmission Prevention Collaborative, so folks like you from all over the country could submit case studies so we could learn from each other, right? It's not about readmission prevention. It's about admission prevention. That's what value-based care is about, keeping you well and healthy and at home, right? So don't give away my secret because I'm the guy who wrote the book. I'm literally the guy who wrote the book, right? And I have the website, but this isn't what it's about. Modern Healthcare, the #1 magazine for healthcare executives, calls me every year when the readmission penalties comes out. They call my friend Dr. Coleman, who is the researcher that did the research for years, and they call me. And last year they said, give us one thing that hospitals can do to prevent readmissions, just one. They obviously knew I was long-winded, right? And I said, that's easy. Reprogram your emergency department because it's not about readmission prevention. It's about your emergency room physicians only admitting patients that can't be cared for at a lower level of care. You with me? So let's talk about that. I teach at the University of Southern California. It's a great honor. I teach graduate students, many probably very similar to like you in the room. They work for the best health systems out there, Cedars-Sinai, UCLA, Sharp, all over. They work for payers, okay? I love that because it keeps me sharp and fresh, right? So first lesson, they're graduate students. They know what they're doing. They're people that have been working in hospitals for 4 or 5 years, and now they're ready to take the next step. One of them said to me in our second session, second time we offered it in first session, they said, hey, you know, this is my first time in 4 semesters, final semester of the program. Every class I've had has been about the acute hospital. I want to pause there for a second and let's all acknowledge that's a problem. Right? That's how the system, the programs used to be designed, and it made sense then. But in a new model, an insurance model where we're incentivized to keep people well and at home, should all the classes be about, here we come, the largest expense in the model? Because that is the new model. Hospitals are the largest expense in the new model. And that's a huge transition. But here goes the lesson. We're going to have fun. I go up to the whiteboard and I say, role play. Let's do it together here now. I'm the hospital CEO. You are the owner of an emergency physician group, meaning I need you and your doctors to staff my emergency room. I need 2 docs during the day or at night and 3 during the day. I'm going to pay you $10,000 a month to supplement whatever you got to pay them. You can bill for everybody else you see. You're going to submit a proposal to me, and you got to beat out everybody in here. Okay? So I ask my students, raise your hand and tell me what information is going to be in that proposal. And they can't wait to raise their hand and say the right thing because, like all of us, they got into healthcare to make a difference and do the right thing. And I want board-certified doctors, and I want quality doctors, and I want physicians who are local and know this community. And I stop them right there because I don't want them to embarrass themselves. This is capitalism. You have to convince me that you're going to put more heads in my beds than everybody else in here, and you're hired. Oh, before you submit the proposal, we'll go back and put all the fancy quality stuff in there for sure. This is capitalism. Head in a bed. It's the only way I get paid. So the emergency room is about get them in, right? Guess what lesson number 2 is on the other side of the whiteboard? Let's talk about what a hospitalist is. And let me simplify it for you. The minute the hospitalist writes the admission order when the emergency room physician tells him to, I walk into the case manager's office and say, why is that patient still here? So if the ED doctor is to get them in, the hospitalist's job is simply to get them out. The lesson's over. 3 minutes into my class, one of my students starts shaking their head, and I said, what's up? Same student that said, first class I've had that wasn't acute, right? He says, I just learned more in 3 minutes than I learned in all those classes put together. Because so many of these things didn't make sense to me. Why are hospitals dragging their feet on transforming to value-based care? The president passed a bill in 2010. Well, because there's no incentive to do it, right? They were the kings of the hill. I could have a steak dinner every night for free from a vendor when I was a hospital CEO. Because I had a huge checkbook and I could write it anybody I wanted. And now go and try and sell a hospital something. You know what they say? And they're right. Why are you coming to me? I only get paid when there's a head in the bed. They took some of my money away and said, if you're good and you do really well, we'll give you this much of it back. It's the payer that's at risk. And until your hospital is more at risk, you're going to be in a conundrum, right? So we talk about, in this book, Execute, a former hospital CEO tells all on what's wrong with American healthcare. I will tell you, if you want to read to learn about readmission prevention, this is a great read, but bring coffee. It's not that exciting. If you want to be entertained and learn about our healthcare system and transformation and why it needs to be transformed, that's the book you got here. It's about a 3-hour read. And I have a short attention span like many of you, so you can read some of these short chapters at a stoplight. They're so short. So this one will make you laugh a little and will make you cry, but I have a chapter in there called the fee-for-service free-for-all. And I use that term as much as I can. And in a room like this, when you think about it for 2 seconds, it doesn't need an explanation, does it? Because in the fee-for-service era, when you called your doctor and said, I have a stomach ache, he or she only got paid when they saw you in their office or saw you at the hospital, right? There was no incentive for them to be honest with you. And I just told you this story about the emergency room physician, so you all know now that you're not going to the hospital to be assessed. You're going to be justified for admission. If any of you hospitals are still doing observation, can we take 60 seconds and ask why? Because the incentive of observation, and I'm going to talk in a few minutes about the importance of generational communication, but millennials might not know this term, 2359. Because years ago, when the emergency room doctors ran their initial 3 tests and couldn't find a way to justify to admit you, they'd run 5 more and bill for them. And then if they still couldn't find more, we would say, shove them in the next room, we'll find something tomorrow. And the federal government said, you can only keep them for 24 hours. Then you got to let them go. And then a couple of hospitals were understaffed, probably mine included, right? And 2 or 3 days go by and they're still sitting there Who cares? They're just human beings with a life. We could get paid if we find something wrong with them, right? So we started calling it observation. Nobody even paid attention to observation until value-based care came around. But the incentive to do observation and fee-for-service was great, wasn't it? Nowadays, there's no incentive at all. But because we all got into this industry for the right reasons, to make a difference and help people get healthier, we haven't stopped to realize. The payer, I'm going to challenge you right now, the payer has said that individual does not qualify to be admitted to your hospital. What does that have to do with you or your responsibility or your liability? Let me answer it. Nothing at all. Because we've been forced for 20 years to take the blame, to take it in the stomach. We're programmed to think we can't send them home. What if something happens? Well, the payer said they don't qualify. They don't need it. And ever since I stepped out of the C-suite, those things become so clear to me. There is no motivation to do observation, and almost every hospital in the country still does it. It's time to stop and ask why and put it back on the payer. After all, they're the ones with the money. You're the one that only gets paid by them when you put a head in a bed. And they don't want to pay you unless the head is in a bed for the right reasons that meet criteria. And that's what changed. The federal government got tired of doctors saying, doggone it, I've known little Josh since he was 12 and something was wrong, even if those 8 tests didn't show anything. And over the years, they got louder and louder. Finally, the Fed said, hey, do you remember when you were in college, your checking account was always empty? Well, the Medicare fund's empty. We've got to change to a system with checks and balances, with criteria. And I'm not picking on doctors saying the feds don't trust you. I got news for you. They don't trust any of us. I went back to talk to some regional medical directors from CMS and then the next time back to the Medicare Payment Advisory Commission. And what I learned after my second visit with MedPAC is, man, they don't trust home health. I'm thinking, I thought they'd be pushing home health, right? We're pushing people down out of the hospital to lower levels of care that are less expensive. They don't trust it because there's so much fraud going on there. You don't believe me? They've put half the states under a moratorium. Can't even have new home healths, right? They don't trust any of us, and this is why. The louder we screamed, the more we pounded our fist, the more they kept paying us without checks and balances. So my grandmother got caught up in the fee-for-service free-for-all, and she rode what I call the fee-for-service merry-go-round for the last summer of her life. And when bundled payments got created, they looked at folks like my grandma and said she costed $298,000 the last summer of her life. We think that a hospital who has the right incentives to get Josh's grandma healthier could have done that for $48,000. So we're going to give them $48,000. And if you're not familiar with bundled payments, that's pretty much how it works, if you want to simplify it. Here's $48,000 for Josh's grandmother's hip. Good luck. I hope you now know how to communicate with the post-acute providers because you're paying them. A little stat I shared with some students today on a webinar. On April 1st, 2 years ago, when bundled payments launched, 64 markets, 3 of every 4 patients that got a hip replacement were going to a nursing home. You'd be amazed how us hospital folk will pay attention when we're paying the bill. Because on April 2nd, that number went down to 1 in 4. We already established that no Americans want to go to a convalescent home. You know, I use convalescent on purpose, right? Because I was trained to never use that term. Many of you are shaking your head. You were too. Why is that? This is a Joshism, by the way, because I just step back and go, why would they tell me never to use convalescent? Oh, I know. Because every American during the 70s and 80s promised their parents and grandparents we would never send them to a convalescent home. So why not change the name, right? Now, as I go into nursing homes, they're saying, oh, they're telling us not to call it a nursing home. And I go, well, it is a nursing home. But then I think back to when I was told not to call it a convalescent home. It's the same game, right? Because now we promise our parents will never send them to a nursing home. So now they call it things like express rehab. So we don't know. They're sending us to a nursing home. It is what it is, right? So don't be fooled by those things. So guys, value-based care was to get us away from you put a head in a bed and you get paid. It's criteria-based. You can do whatever you want and admit patients, but if the criteria isn't met, we're not going to pay you. So I made that career change. I became a hospital CEO. I was on my way, but it was really more about the journey. And let's talk about my lifelong journey, because at this point, some people are like, man, I came to have a good time tonight, and this guy's kind of bumming me out a little bit. Yes, that's me, my freshman year in high school. My wife always says, I can't believe you put that picture of you on there. It's awful. I tried to bleach my hair blonde. I thought that was cool in Southern California back then. It didn't work out. It's my freshman ID card. But hey, raise your hand. Oh, warning right here. I'm going to use the M word in a minute. So, You can roll your eyes one last time. We're going to talk about millennials, okay? I know some of you, I've seen the eyes roll the first 2 times I mentioned it. Before we get to you millennials, there's a few here. Raise your hand if you're a proud Gen Xer like me. We don't get picked on anymore, so you can be proud. You can raise your hand. Okay, so we're going to make a point about communication here. Raise your hand. Be proud here. When somebody told us to jump, we knew what to say. We all knew the answer, so I need you to say it with me on the count of 3. When somebody told us to jump, what do we say? 1, 2, 3. How high? See how good we are as Gen Xers? We pay attention. Raise your hand if you're a millennial. Be proud. Be brave. Come on, higher. Get it up higher. I'm proud of you guys for raising your hands, but because I don't think they'll answer my question honestly, I want to ask you, a millennial is defined as somebody who was born between 1983 and roughly 1999, okay? So if you have a child or a grandchild born in those years, raise your hand, because I think you'll answer this question for me, because millennials answer every question with the same one-word answer. So if you ask a millennial to jump or anything else, what are they going to say? Why? Man, I get 100%. Yes, we're doing good. I'm all about audience participation today. Okay, now here's the deal. If you are a baby boomer or of the greatest generation, I want to thank you on behalf of the rest of us for being obedient. And you probably would have just said yes, ma'am, or yes, sir, if somebody asked you to jump. And it's unfortunate we've lost that courtesy, but it's a reality. And my kids are Gen Z, and they still do the why thing. And I always say to my wife, do I have to answer that question? But you know what I think a Gen Zer is going to do when somebody asks them to jump? They're not even going to look up from their PDA. They're just going to send you an emoji of somebody jumping, right? So, guys, I want to make this point really quickly. Are you considering how your communication is being understood based on the generation of who you're speaking to? And I want to give you an example right here. If you haven't watched Simon Sinek's video on millennial culture, you've done yourself an in-service. I want you to do it tomorrow, not this weekend, tomorrow, because you'll lose a few more days that are very important to understand how you're being perceived. Not only did I watch it twice in a row, it brought me to tears. And then my wife came in and watched it, and I said, stop doing the dishes, get in here and watch this. You got to understand why people never understand what we're saying. My kids came home from high school, and it was part of their final exam for their career class, which was encouraging for me. But for healthcare folks, sometimes my word to go on YouTube wasn't enough and watch Simon Sinek, so I put a healthcare article up there for you too. And what I love about this healthcare article, I'm going to get up here so I can show how this works. It talks from Maureen Bassano in this Health Leaders magazine. It talks about this whole topic of understanding millennial culture. And it talks about a boomer who's worked at this hospital for 40 years. And he's in his shared office space, probably about as big as this stage, with his colleague, a young lady who's millennial. And he turns to her and he goes, hey, are you going to come to the cafeteria tomorrow for the punch and cake celebration of my 40 years? I'm going to get my pet. That's how we do it in the hospitals, punch and cake, right? We can make it in the cafeteria. It doesn't cost us anything. It's like, he's so proud. He's like, I've been here 40 years. I'm going to get my 40-year pen, right? So she's over here. She hears something, so she pulls her earbud out. Thank you for laughing. It's amazing how many people don't laugh. That's funny. I've actually learned since then that some companies are encouraging employees to wear earbuds, and I'll need to read that article if you've read it, because I don't quite get it. She pulls out her earbud and looks at him and says, dude, are you crazy? You worked here 40 years? I'm out of here in 18 months if they don't promote me. And guess what? They're both right. And I remember being a young Gen Xer and people going, they just don't get it. Why? Because we watch MTV and drink Diet Coke? No, we just didn't get it because we were different. Here's when it dawned upon me that I have to start talking about millennial culture. I travel the country speaking, and I have for 3 or 4 years, probably 5 years now. And in 2016, I quit hearing this one statement I'd been hearing for the prior 3 years from folks like you. Oh, my grandmother will never use an iPad. Oh, my grandma won't ever wear a wearable. Oh, my grandma will never use a cell phone or that new technology that's going to help transform healthcare. Never heard that anymore. Why? Technology got too good. We didn't have a choice. And everybody started using it. And do you know what that meant to me? In 2016, millennial culture became American culture. And so we have to stop and understand that that's the future, and that's how we're being interpreted. Understanding alternative payment models. Let's talk a little bit about APMs. So in the model of the future, guys, hospitals, whether they're part of a chain or not, have to think like they're part of a chain. And the chain has to think like it's part of an HMO or a managed care organization. Why? Because they are. They're being forced into it. I had a great conversation backstage with a couple of the CEOs that are going to be on the panel, and we'll talk about this. And the first question I asked was, how far along in that transition are you? Because most of the nation isn't even 20% of the way there. And what I mean by that is if you looked at all your Medicare claims, how many of them are still fee-for-service and how many of them are going through an alternative payment model? And there's two types of alternative payment models. There's an accountable care organization and there's a bundled payment program. Now, I'll show you a slide in a second, but guys, this right here shows that the model of the future is an insurance model. You see that term ball control? I used that term because a few years ago I described how important it was for a hospital or a health system to control length of stay in a nursing home and in the home health. And this nice lady, I'm sure she was a social worker for a lot of years, came up to me afterwards and she said, gosh, I really liked everything you said and you got lots of energy, but I just didn't like that you called people balls. So I said, well, I'm going to stick with it just because you remember it, because that's what I do. So, ball control. I can assure you that if your health system isn't controlling length of stay in the nursing home, it's not going to come down. Let me give you a couple examples of why. Do you know why the average length of stay in most nursing homes nationwide is 20 days? Because on day 21, got to pay a copay. It's amazing how grandpa all of a sudden is like, dang, my back feels better, I'm out. Guess what? I ran nursing homes for years, and guess what grandpa would have said on day one if he would have had a copay? Dang, my back feels better, I'm out. You might laugh, but it's true most of the time. It's just a fact. Ball control. If you don't control the length of stay, it will continue to be 14 to 21. They get paid, nursing homes, in 7-day increments. It's a per diem based on 7-day increments. Okay? But let's talk about this. I went into a health system. It's been about 5 years. I don't do a lot of consulting. It's not something I love. But when a health system says, hey, we just want to get all the way there now, and we'll figure it out once you get us there, I say, okay, that's my kind of health system. Let's do it. So I walk into the room. It's up in Washington. The first thing they say is, hey, we read your book, and we see you on LinkedIn, and we know you're like really progressive. But before you say anything, we just want to know, should we create our own nursing home and open our own home health, or should we just contract with one of these post-acute companies who has multiple levels of care? And it was a loaded question. They obviously follow me on LinkedIn and see how outspoken I've been about this, because I said, okay, so I have a short answer for you. I was the CEO at almost every level of post-acute care because I can't keep a job for very long. And do you know what my bonus structure was at all those levels of care? It depended on how many of your heads I put in my beds, how long I kept them, and as much money as I could make off of them as possible. That was true at the LTAC, it was true at the acute rehab, it was true at the SNF, and it's true in a home health. Why in the world would you partner with that organization who incentivizes their CEOs to do exactly what they're telling you they would never do? They're speaking out of both sides of their mouth, no matter what they say. They went, okay, we're good. Let's move on to the next topic. All right. So guys, this slide, I just kept adding bullet points to it through the years of all these programs, and they all are trying to get to the same thing. If you put a head in a bed that doesn't need to be there, we're not going to pay you. That's what the federal government is saying with all of these. Do you know the only one of these that even got the hospital's attention until recently? It's RAC audits. You know what a RAC audit is? Let me give you the layman's version. You admitted 100 patients to the hospital. Send us 30 of the charts. If the documentation's there that justifies that they needed to be there, we'll let you keep your money. Is that fair? So I'm not a clinician, but I did work in healthcare for almost 20 years, and I will tell you, if the patient needed to be in my hospital, I'm fairly certain the documentation would be in the chart. And if they didn't, I never joined the hospital lobby to go, give us our money back, because we probably didn't deserve to be paid in the first place. Because we were hired to do a job, and we were poisoned, and I underline that word poisoned, by the fee-for-service era, where we were driven by putting a head in a bed at all costs. And this is the point where I like to just stop for a second and give another disclaimer. If you're challenging anything I've said today, I want to challenge you to ask yourself this. If you weren't poisoned by the fee-for-service era, why would you have a single problem with anything I've said? Because what I'm talking about is patient-centered care. Putting my grandmother first, putting my mom first, putting your mom first. I'm talking about putting the patient and their best well-being as the number one priority and not considering anything else. We're great at talking out of the side of our mouth and saying that in health systems, aren't we? You should say yes, because if you work in healthcare, that's the first thing you're trained to say, no matter what level you work at, is how great we are and we have a mission, right? So, what are these other bullet points? The hospital readmission penalty program, I already told you, hospital executives didn't even look at that for 5 years. Why would they? To this day, I don't know a single hospital that has spent 1 penny to prevent readmissions. Now, hold on. No, you're going, oh, I'm going to challenge them. Please do outside when we're signing books. But think about it before then. Because if you went to any of these folks in the front row, their CEOs, and said, can you give me $10,000 a month to keep heads out of your beds? How do you think they're going to react? No. Heck no. I only get paid when there's a head in the bed. Why would I spend money to keep heads out of my beds? Even in a value-based model, that's the payer's issue, not mine. Right? When it comes to writing a check to keep readmissions out of the hospital, if that's the only reason they're spending money, they won't spend the money. And I just explained why. It's capitalism. And what about bundled payments? You know, bundled payments are here to stay, and they're probably a step in the right direction, but there hasn't been a lot of support on that. What I would argue is the probably most relevant thing that happened during the Obama administration is the second to last one here on the bottom. It's called Better, Smarter, Healthier, somewhere down here. Better, Smarter, Healthier actually wasn't a policy or a law at all. It was a goal of the Obama administration. We're not going to force you to do ACOs. We're not going to force you into bundled payments. Oh, but by 2016, you need to have 30% of your claims through one of those. And by 2018, it needs to be 50%. We're going to force you. They might be optional, but they're only optional until you pick one and start going. My favorite penalty of all is Medicare spending per beneficiary. What it does, and guys, I'm going to show you how all these penalties are measured, and this is going to simplify readmissions and everything else for you. Hospitals, listen, if you're asleep, wake up real quick. I want you to hear this part. Don't be the person in the room that says hospitals don't get paid for readmissions, because they do. Our government's not capable of knowing that a patient was discharged from a hospital 3 days ago and is already back. At the end of the year, somebody goes like this on the keyboard. Show me how many readmissions to any hospital in the country were discharged from hospital A and showed up at any other hospital in the country within 30 days. If that hospital averages more than the average, they take money back. That's the readmission penalty. When I researched that green book, man, it took me 6 months to get that answer because nobody knew. Why would anybody want to know about some new penalty that's punitive as an exact contradiction to how we get reimbursed? I look back, and when I'm thankful or down on my knees being thankful, I was on the front end of a curve because nobody else wanted to be. It was an accident. I just had questions about readmissions and wanted to know them, started researching them, and then I figured out 2 years later, no wonder nobody wanted to be in charge of this, because they're the one in the room that's going to get in trouble when others are getting fired because less heads are being put in beds. I had this lady come up to me, she was really sweet, about 3 years ago, 2013, 14, and she goes, oh man, that was such a good presentation. Your health system must be so glad that you're their vice president of post-acute services. They have the readmission author guy. And you know what I said? I haven't brought readmissions up to my boss once in a year. Why would I? All he's stressed about, and you can see it on his face, it's red. His census is down. How much money he's being reimbursed per day for the patients that are there is down. And we're getting penalized in 7 ways that we weren't 4 years ago. So do you think I want to stand up and say, hey, you know those 3 people that were laid off last week, and you know how our revenue's down, our census is down? I did it. It's me. Pat me on the back. Why not, right? That's why this is something that hasn't been owned by people. And I put this last one up there because I want you all to know post-acute MSPB, Medicare spending per beneficiary, is a new penalty that the government goes like this. Show me how much money we spent on that nursing home on average, including the 90 days after patients were discharged. If it's more than the average, that nursing home is going to get a fine. They're going to take money back. And so let's role play here. I like to do that. Hey, let's pretend you and I own the business together, because that really puts capitalism in place, doesn't it? So let's own a nursing home together. And you come to me in a year and go, hey, policy geek, we just got this penalty, and they're trying to take a bunch of our money back. What does it mean? Oh, it means they spent more money on us during the stay and the 90 days after. And, well, why are we getting penalized for the 90 days after? That's home health, right? Yeah, well, we don't own a home health. Well, I don't know if any of you know a nursing home owner, but I know what the next comment is going to be from everyone I know. Why would we ever refer to home health again? And I'm being serious, because that's what they're going to say. Is that the intent of that penalty? No. The intent was to get SNFs to stop keeping everybody for 20 days and giving them as much therapy as possible. I mean, shoot, I go to the gym 4 days a week in a good week, and after 40 minutes, I'm huffing and puffing. But nursing homes think that senior citizens can do 3 hours a day, 6 days a week, right? Why not? So, guys, think about that as you think about the continuum and how those things. So, you know why I put this last one on there? That means more readmissions are coming to your emergency department next year. Because as soon as that owner says no more home health, there's no supervision when patients get sent home, they end up in your ED. Now we go back to my comment to modern healthcare. Reprogram your emergency department. Admit the right patients, don't admit the others. So this is an insurance model. I have a belief, and as was mentioned earlier, I do some writing for LinkedIn and Forbes and some other publications. I'm pretty close to writing an article about how in 15 years I think hospitals will either be owned by the big Fortune 500 company in town or the state or the county, because once we figure out they're not supposed to be profitable businesses, they're supposed to be, and they are, the largest expense in the model, why would they be considered a profitable business? They won't be. You need to stop looking at them as profit centers and start looking at them as expense centers. And that's exactly what they're being forced into in the insurance model. But hey, when you're the coolest kid in school, you remember how cool the quarterback was? Like, got to go to the prom with whoever they wanted, and then like the week after graduation, nobody cared anymore? That's how a lot of hospitals are feeling right now. Like, what happened to when we were in charge? One of the reasons I like to deliver this presentation is to say to hospitals, you still have some muscle. Use it while you can to get the post-acute facilities to play along with you, because every year that passes, you're less and less important. You're more and more like that nursing home that you never paid attention to, and the insurers and carriers are going to start paying less and less attention to you. You're not going to get the rates you want out of them, and they're just going to go down the street to the next hospital and say, I don't care. And that's what I've seen happen in the last few years. So it's really an insurance model, no matter how you look at it. This slide simply shows you that in the health system of the future, the hospital is the last resort. The nursing home is the second to last resort. You notice I don't even list long-term acute care, acute rehab up there, because it can't exist. It can't survive in a model that's completely value-based. And for those who want to disagree, I would just ask you probably work for one of them, how many managed care approvals or authorizations have you gotten in the last month? The answer is 0. And then we're moving to a completely managed care model, right? Let's be business owners if you still disagree with me. I'm not sending somebody for $1,200 a day when we can get it for $400 down the street. Why would anybody? It's just capitalism, guys. So look at where it says home health. Health systems years ago used to say, oh, Josh, we have to provide patients choice, and we can't steer, and we're required by law to have every home health agency that applies and put them on a list. The first regional medical director I ever got the opportunity to speak to about that, I said, hey, can we talk about the stupid, irresponsible requirement that I have to list every home health on my list? And after he was like, should I be offended? No, he's probably right. He goes, well, what do you mean? I said, value-based care wants me to coordinate. I can only coordinate with like 3, let alone 100. And it really opened up a great dialogue. And I'm not here today to talk about choice versus steering, but let me just do it briefly so we can put this to bed. We are Americans, and we will always have a choice where we can go for a hospital and post-acute facility. Years ago, hospital CEOs who pay attorneys $800 an hour to keep us out of trouble and tell us to take the high road, paid our attorneys to say, hey, tell us about this choice thing and tell us about this separate thing called steering by the doctor in the hospital to nursing homes. And our attorneys came back and said, you pay me to take the high road, so what I would say is you can't say anything to a patient in the hospital about where they're going to go for post-acute care. So we let attorneys who have nothing to do with health care tell us the way to interpret that is that we can't say anything. And that translates to this. Oh, your mom needs to go to a nursing home. Here's a list of all of them in the community. I'll throw it on your bed. Let me know which one you want to go to. To this day, you will meet social workers that say, that's the law, we can't do anything. Guess what? Not only are they wrong today, they were wrong all along, because I paid an attorney to tell them, take the high road, and they will tell you that's always been the law, it's never been the law. This is choice. You'll always have it in America. You can go wherever you want. You're in an HMO, they can tell you can't go to that hospital. Wrong. You can go wherever you want. You might have to pay more for it. That's choice. Steering is when you say, hey, you have CHF. Here are the 3 nursing homes that we work with that have really good scores with CHF. Is there anything wrong with that at all? No. And until value-based care come along, we were held to that standard. You'd be amazed how many discharge planners, case managers, and social workers are still digging their heels in. We aren't allowed to talk to them. What that means is you're not allowed to talk to them. I'll tell them whatever I want because my sister works for this SNF or that home health. All that gamesmanship's gone away. And for hospital executives like myself, do you know who the most intelligent people in the building are about post-acute care when it's time to start transforming? It's your case managers and social workers. That's who it is. They're the experts in the room. But when they dig their heels in about choice, get your attorney in that's there and say, they only say this because you told them to say it, now tell them they're wrong. And do you know which public policies they use to show them they're wrong? The same ones they used to show them they were right. It's awesome. And every time in the last 6 years somebody's challenged me on this, I have a slide, I'm going to send it to you. So about 20% of the time I actually get the email. And the 20% I do, I go, hey, the source down the bottom says it's a consultant, not CMS. Guys, this is America. Patients will have a choice, but you have a responsibility as a healthcare provider to steer them to the most appropriate level of care and facility for them, not make them go. And somebody's going to go, he just said you have a responsibility to steer. He can't do that. Oh, well, CMS did it with their last 4 alternative payment models. They require you to steer. That was a great I told you so day for Josh Luke. 4 programs. You send everybody to SNFs they want to go to, but if 50% of them or more don't go to a 3 or 4-star SNF, you're out. That is steering by definition. What an exciting day that we're now being empowered to do the right thing and to educate you. My mom, bless her heart, has late-stage Alzheimer's disease. When she goes to the hospital, do you know what I need from you as a hospital? I need you not to go, she has Medicare, send her to a SNF. I need you to say, Mr. Luke, here are the 7 needs your mom has. There's good news, her benefit covers 4 of them. The other 3, we need to talk about, they might require your resources. Guess what many of us were told for several years? Oh, you can't talk about those 3 things that need resources because they're not covered by her benefit. That was wrong then and it's wrong now. Do you know why I know it's wrong? Because on almost every state now, something called the Care Management Act is passed. And all it's doing is saying we're requiring you to have a conversation with Josh about his mom and to say what all of her needs are, even if they're not covered by the benefit. Mr. Luke, these 4 are covered, but these 3 might require some resources, including money, including some effort, and going out to a community-based organization that can provide support. Do you see the bottom one here? Non-medical home care and assisted living. They are the winners in the new model. Why is that? Because insurance doesn't pay for it. Oops, guess what? It's 2018. As of last week, insurance does pay for those things. Why? Because the federal government heard your cry and said, we've been proving to you for years that non-medical home care and assisted living can save us money and provide a better level of care and honor Americans' wish to be in a home-based environment instead of a convalescent home. Last week, CMS made it official that in 2020, Medicare Advantage programs and states can redefine necessary health services. Home care, assisted living, iPads, you name it. You prove the model, they're not going to argue with you. And that's what they've been saying at the Innovation Center for years, and that's exciting to me. Do you know why this has always been the bottom one? Because Medicare and benefits didn't pay for it. It's a cash business. Of course the payer is going to support non-medical home care and assisted living. It just took them a matter of time. When my students read Execute in the first semester, I asked them to do their final exam on the book. And you know what they all said? You guys will get a kick out of this. By the end of the book, I knew every chapter was follow the money. I knew every chapter was about capitalism. I knew every chapter was about getting into this industry to make a difference and realizing you've become part of the problem. And it really changed their perspective. But what I appreciated about what they had to say is as long as you understand it's follow the dollar from the start, why wouldn't you have known from the get-go that Medicare Advantage was eventually going to cover services that save money and provide a higher level of care? Let me share something with you. My mom, bless her heart, she doesn't need home health. She doesn't need a nurse or a therapist. She needs eyes and ears to keep her safe so she doesn't trip, so she grooms, so she eats, so she hydrates. My dad still works. It's tax season. He's gone 10 hours a day. So non-medical home care is $25 an hour. Home health is $100 an hour where I live. My mom doesn't need home health. But guess what we would have done when I was running hospitals? Hey, your mom needs supervision at home. Can you guys afford home care? Oh, by the way, that conversation rarely took place because our case managers just assumed you couldn't pay for it. I have to tell you this story. I'm in Beverly Hills one day, and us Gen Xers, you know what Beverly Hills looks like because that was our favorite show, and we can hear the music and all that stuff, right? And I'm having lunch with two case managers about 4 years ago. And we're talking about this exact topic. And we're talking about home care and how it's coming and it's finally here and it's getting accepted. And they go, yeah, but Josh, nobody can afford it. And I just started hearing that song from the richest zip code in the country that we all grew up on. Two case managers from the two best hospitals in California just told me, we don't tell people because nobody can afford it. I wanted to throw my plate. I love the fact that it happened because it is a great visual of the problem. One of the richest zip codes in the country. You all know it by heart. It's so rich. Nobody can afford home care. What a joke. They could afford to buy the whole hospital if they wanted. So have this conversation. My mom didn't need that. She just needed this. One more reason you should have this conversation. When you tell the federal government about this discussion and Josh's mom didn't need home health, but since the kids couldn't afford it, they said, we'll order home health. They called that the F word and not the one you're thinking of. They call it fraud. Because like any other insurer, Blue Cross, Cigna, Anthem, it doesn't matter. Medicare is based on criteria. If my mom didn't meet it, she didn't meet it. I had the pleasure of co-presenting with Amy Bassano a few years ago down in Tennessee. She was the executive director of Medicare's Innovation Center. So awesome. Anytime I get to speak with somebody that important, I always go, can we meet early? I'm a little nervous and I want to talk and go over our slides. I don't really get nervous when I'm speaking, so that's just a cover for me to spend time with somebody important. And I asked her a question, and I love to share this story. I said, hey, if a patient goes from the hospital to the nursing home and then needs home health afterwards, did the nursing home fail? Long pause here, right? We were all trained to send everybody home with home health. It's safe, it's smart, covers our rear end, reduces our liability. Government calls those things fraud. They didn't meet criteria. They didn't meet criteria. I was trained in the hospital to do that. I was trained in the nursing home to do that. I'll get a lot of good discussion in the lobby on this one out there because you guys just want to disagree with it so bad because that's how we were trained. They either meet the criteria or they don't. It's not about covering our liability, right? So do you know what she said after she got a big smile? We wish you guys would ask that question before you send them to a nursing home. Let me tell you why I asked this question. Skilled nursing by definition in an inpatient facility is skilled nursing in an inpatient facility. Home health by definition is skilled nursing not in a facility. They're the same level of care. So now can we ask the question again? If a patient goes to a nursing home and then needs home health, it might be more convenient for you, but remember your checking account was empty in college and the federal government's checking account's empty. They want you to ask the question before they leave the hospital, if this patient's going to need home health, why are we sending him to a nursing home? You might think I hate nursing homes at this point. I'm a nursing home administrator, guys. Come on now. I'm just saying do the right thing. Be honest. Treat it as if it was your mother, your grandmother. And we're down to our last few minutes, so I just want to tell you on this slide, this is the emergency room in the future. Remember the USC class that we talked about? Your doctors have never been paid or trained to understand what goes on outside of the hospital. It's your responsibility to train them. They need to know where patients can go besides being admitted to the hospital or observation. See this? It's called my purple slide. You can guess why. Now, they'll make these slides available to you, but I will just tell you since the font's so small. Under the Medicare benefit, this is every place your emergency room doctor can send a patient other than admitting them to the hospital. Observation, LTAC, acute rehab. I love to say this point because people want to disagree. You can admit a patient from the street corner to the acute rehab. All you need is a doctor to sign it when you get there and say the patient needs to be here. You want to disagree with me? I'll refer you to the largest acute rehab provider in the country who trained me to do that. Skilled nursing. If you learn one thing today, learn that a patient can go back to a skilled nursing facility without 3 midnights in a hospital within 30 days of being discharged from a hospital or a SNF. So if you're discharged March 10th from the facility, the SNF, and on April 8th you show back up in the hospital and say, I'm not feeling good, doc, you don't need to go to the hospital. Send them right back to any nursing home. Their Medicare benefit will cover it. It's called the 30-day rule. Okay? So this slide, if you've ever seen this in your emergency room, it's because I train post-acute providers to take 10 copies and tape it all over your emergency room when you're not looking. Because hospitals are not training their ED doctors to understand this. Why? We already talked about it. They're still incentivized to put in a head in a bed. But when they stop getting paid because it's criteria-based, they'll understand this. Here are some programs that are working nationally. I'm going to let you guys look at this one after because I think they're going to provide these slides to you if you're interested. But there's all kinds of programs that are free to the hospital that are transforming value-based care. Community-based programs. There's great agencies in this neighborhood, and we're going to talk about those during the panel. There's private organizations that are mentioned here that are rewarding nurses for great care, that are connecting the community, that are providing non-medical home care, safe rides home. I understand one of the challenges here in this community is transportation to and from the hospital. There are organizations here within the Area Agency on Aging and other organizations, as well as private organizations, that will do that. Think ahead. A couple of you came up to me on my way in and said, hey, are you going to talk about discharge with dignity today? And this is what I close with. Discharge with dignity is a guide I developed because you all said you don't want to die in a nursing home or ever go to one. Guess what? Nobody's ever raised their hand when I asked that question. So I developed this, and I introduced it at the Case Management Society of America's annual meeting with 2,000 people a couple of years ago, and it was met with a little bit of pushback, and I realized it wasn't because they disagreed, it's because they don't like being told what to do. That's okay. I knew that. They used to work for me, and they'd turn me into CMS all the time. Start at the left. When it's time for a patient to be discharged from the hospital, by the way, 17 of the top 20 health systems in the country have called and asked to use this for training in the last 9 months. It took about a year and a half. Start at the left. We're going to ask one question for every patient in our inpatient unit. Can we get this patient home? Next question. What resources do they need to go home safely? Last question. What risks do we need to communicate to them if they are going to go home? The answer will not always be yes, but it might be. The color of money is green, obviously, and on the left, if you get them home, it doesn't cost you, the payer, anything. Remember, the hospital's the payer now. Being forced into value-based care, remember? These two olive green categories are transitional care management and chronic care management. They're both great programs that Medicare reimburses, but they're not being used hardly anywhere in the country. It's hard to make money off them. Then you move a little bit to the right and you get yellow. You get home with home health. That's going to cost you a little bit. Home with hospice, that's going to cost you a little bit. But orange is nursing home. Why is it orange? Because we're getting closer to red, which is the danger zone. If you send patients to acute rehab and long-term acute care, your value-based care organization is going to lose money. That's what this guide shows. It's being used for case managers. I'm happy to talk more about it later if you want. In terms of the readmission penalty updates, I think I've covered each of these things. I'm happy to cover them outside. A couple of you asked about blockchain. I have a chart I can show you. It's not here today. Blockchain is a whole science to itself. I like to think of blocks. Every time somebody gets smarter, you just put things on top of them. It's already here in healthcare, and it's just going to be more and more present. Most of you know it as cryptocurrency and Bitcoin. I have a map that will show you all the healthcare providers in the country that are accepting cryptocurrency and Bitcoin. It's a lot, and it's getting bigger by the month. So I want to wrap up with this slide, and I want to share with you that I was speaking in Ohio 3 weeks ago, and a case management director came up to me, the same one that invited me to come speak to her organization that was at that meeting 2 years ago in Long Beach, and said, hey, I made these buttons for my case management team. It says, why not home, Mercy Health? She couldn't wait to tell me. And I couldn't wait to say, can I have that? So I'm showing it to everybody, and I'm challenging you. If you're in a hospital, for $250, you can probably get 500 buttons. Why not home? And you know what my presentation is usually called? It's usually called For My Mom and Yours. Because that's what I'm here to talk to you guys about. And I want to wrap up with this, guys. My mom, as I mentioned, has Alzheimer's disease. She was diagnosed in 2010. She was 65 years old. Both of my grandmothers had Alzheimer's disease. It's an awful disease, so I was familiar with it. But my mom was only 65, and I was angry. I was really mad. So about 5 years later, in 2015, in the mail, January 6th, I got a box in the mail, and it was the first 3 copies of this book, Readmission Prevention, my first book. And I opened it up, and I looked at my wife, and I said, hey, I want to take one of these copies up to Mom and Dad and thank them for always just encouraging me to get an education and pursue my PhD and just to chase my dream. My mom had lost a lot of her memory by 2015. She could only remember 2 people's names, my dad and my wife. My wife was her best friend. My wife looked at me with tears in her eyes and she said, did you know your mom can't read anymore? That's the woman that taught me to read. It was heartbreaking. But you know what else, guys? It was convicting. It was convicting that I got into this industry because my grandmother, right? She brought me here to try and do something good, to make a difference. And then my mom's going through the same thing. And I've realized I became part of the problem. I got in to make a difference, and I haven't become part of the problem. So how can I fix it? What can I do? I was convicted, and that day, I realized I was part of the problem. My wife and I decided to found a not-for-profit, and we've done that. But I also said, hey, can I honor my mom through those values that she instilled in me? And you see a lot of these values up there on the screen right now. My mom's a fighter. You want to know something funny? She can't remember anybody's names, but she hates caretakers. And if you send a caretaker to her door, she answers the door like this. She's ready to punch, right? Can you imagine? You see this lady standing there, go, don't come in here, right? She can't even remember my name, but she can remember that. But she taught me about empathy, and I told you about my AIT program. She taught me about passion. You guys have seen that passion. So my goal is just to carry on those traditions. And guys, I want to close by just saying Forbes came to me about a year ago and said, hey, we want a book for American businesses that teaches them how to make healthcare affordable. And we've recruited 8 people, and you're one of them. And we think you'd be good to write this book. And they narrowed it down to 2, and then they called me and said, hey, we want it to be you because we want a provider. We want a truth teller. We want somebody from the other side to come say, hey, I'm going to expose everything. I said, well, it's not really exposing anything other than the truth. We just don't want you to know. So I wrote a book called Health Wealth. Is healthcare bankrupting your business? 9 Steps to Financial Recovery. On January 18th of this year, Forbes released this, and it went to number 1. And do you know what? I'm proud of that. It became a bestseller on Forbes, on Amazon on launch day. But do you know what happened that day? Intermountain Healthcare and Ascension and a bunch of others announced they were starting their own pharmacy because they can't afford to provide care in an affordable manner. Within a week, what happened? J.P. Morgan, Amazon, Berkshire Hathaway, blow it up. We're starting over. Within a week of that, Disney in Florida, we're out. We can't afford it anymore. Every week, something new. Then Apple says, hey, we realize those big EMR companies that are controlling your hospitals that have zero incentive to keep you healthy and well at home because the people paying their bills are hospitals. We got somebody that's more important than them. They're called Apple. They're called Microsoft. They're called Amazon. And here they come. Within 2 months of this book coming out, and you as Americans making it a number 1, saying, I've reached my tipping point. My family can't afford health care. All those things have happened. What happened last week? Walmart. If you can't beat them, buy them. We're buying Humana, and we'll bring costs down. We're the most efficient company in the world. Watch this. I am confident, guys. I'm going to release a book in September called Health Wealth for Family. Is healthcare bankrupting your family? You don't need to answer that. I know the answer is yes. Because every American family can't afford healthcare. And look at these huge businesses that can't either. All these things we talked about today, if we move in the right direction and focus on putting patients first, this is the year. 2018 is the year that Americans declared the tipping point on healthcare affordability. And I will tell you, insurers are paying attention and hospitals are paying attention. Thank you guys very much.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Luke, for an engaging, progressive, and sometimes provocative conversation. I hope you all enjoyed that. This segment of the program, we will now move to the moderated panel discussion. So what I'd like to do is, before I call onto stage our panelists, I'll just give you the format. After the moderated panel discussion led by Dr. Luke, we will then open it up to audience questions. If you are an audience member and you have a question, I'm just going to ask if you could briefly state your question and your name. So now I'd like to call up our panelists. First, I'm going to call up Nora O'Brien-Surek. Please come to the stage. Nora O'Brien-Surek is the president and CEO of the Health Foundation for Western and Central New York. Thank you. Tom Quattrochi, Jr. Tom is the president and CEO of Erie County Medical Center Corporation. Thank you. Jody Lomeo. Jody Lomeo is the president and CEO of Kaleida Health. And last but not least, CJ Erlub, who's the president and CEO of Mercy Hospital and the chairman of the Board of Trustees at DeUville College. Thank you all.
All right. I'm so excited to learn more about what I started to learn about earlier. And Nora, we're going to start with you on each question, and we're going to work our way this way, if that's okay. So I want to start with Nora and I got to have lunch today, and I learned so much about the awesome community-based programs that you guys have here. And it really got me to understand what a great panel this is, because we have hospitals that have a community resource here, one of the best in the country. And some of the discussions we talked about today are all the resources that this community has that are available to hospitals, and how we can get hospitals, not just these three, but other hospitals throughout the region, to really engage in them more. So the first question, Nora, I wanted to put to you first, and then we'll work our way across the stage, is describe the relevance of the continuum of care to the futuristic health system on a national and local level.
Oh, thank you, Josh, and thank you for your wonderful talk. I was so engaged and very thought-provoking. And I just want to mention, because you mentioned that you got into this because of your grandmother and your mom. I'm a geriatric social worker, and I got involved because my grandmother was a nurse in a nursing home. And so I started out young, and I went into geriatric social work, and I've been working in this field since 1980s, trying to improve care for older adults, working in hospital systems, home health care, nursing homes, and in community-based organizations, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. But I just want to say that what you just said rang so true for me personally and relevantly recently, because I just lost my dad a week ago. And the system failed him. I failed him. I was not able to get the care for him that he deserved. He did not get the dignity that he deserved in the last 3 weeks of his life. And what you just described, from hospital, from assisted living to hospital to a nursing home to the grave, 3 weeks. And so this is really relevant to me, and we have to get this right, because it's been too long. And I'm very angry and even more determined to get this right. And I'm looking forward to partnering with everybody in this room, on the panel, and others, locally, statewide, and federally, in order to make sure that we can get this right. So continuum of care. Continuum of care is so important. I'm going to expand the definition. What you talked about with hospitals, nursing homes, assisted living, I want to broaden it out to non-medical. We have community-based organizations that actually provide non-medical interventions in the home. You talk about non-medical home care. We have area agencies on aging here that contract with agencies, case management agencies, and other essential services that can provide the essential home-based services that are necessary to keep people healthy at home. Health happens at home. If we're going to keep people in the home and out of hospitals, which is our goal, then we need to engage the community. The community-based organizations are the trusted source in the community. They know the culture, they know the people, they're trusted. And they can go into the home and do a home assessment, identify what's needed for falls prevention, bring in chronic disease self-management programs, look at caregiver support, caregiver education, health literacy. If the trend now is moving across the country, and you may have heard of this already, that hospital systems, accountable care organizations, home care agencies, health HMOs, and CMOs, I'll get that right, managed care organizations, MCOs, are now partnering with networks of community-based organizations to provide this continuum of care from hospital to home and to keep them home. And so I would just want to expand that definition of what the continuum of care includes. We have examples from across the country that show that there can be reduction in healthcare costs. The ACO in Chicago, partnering with a community-based organization to provide advanced nutrition care, has reduced by per person per hospitalization $3,000. A California Accountable Care Organization, 50% reduction in readmissions when the ACO partnered with a network of community-based organizations, and you know that network because June Simmons runs it, Partners in Care. And also, California Blue Cross has partnered with the same organization, and they targeted the high-cost, high-needs patients on their list, 10,000 in the Los Angeles area, and they demonstrated a reduction in healthcare costs. This is the trend There's the Aging and Disability Business Institute that is providing technical assistance to community-based organizations in order to learn the legal partnerships that are needed and how to form this entity to partner with hospitals and accountable care organizations. This is the health system of the future, partnering with community-based organizations, expanding the continuum of care from medical to non-medical, keep people in the home. That's where health happens.
So, Tom, give us the hospital's perspective on the same question about the continuum of care. And I made the point very provocatively that we had no reason whatsoever to pay attention in the past, and that's changed. So give us your perspective on how that's changed, please.
So I think that you're right in the incentive piece. But having said that, I think the intention of the community and of the hospitals of providing quality care hasn't changed, but making sure that the institutions, not just hospitals, but community organizations, have enough resources to survive is a challenge. So, and having said that, the cost pressures are all around us. We're feeling them every single day. But we've already started in this community with some great initiatives to begin to look at that continuum. We're very fortunate that we have a Medicaid waiver program in New York State. And many of the individuals are here from Millennium, which is our performing provider system, that has really brought the community together. I think that's probably been the most important piece of this, because I don't know if that Medicaid waiver is going to continue, frankly, because of politics between the federal government and the state government. What it has done is it's taught us that we need to flip the pyramid upside down. So if the hospitals are at the top and all the community providers at the bottom, we need to turn that upside down. And the community providers need to be the most important piece of delivering that care. And we've begun to do that. The problem is the incentive hasn't changed, right? The financial incentive hasn't changed. So, we're a public hospital, so we have very, small margins. And we have collaborations with Kaleida Health to try to do two things, only really two things. One is improve quality, and the second is pull costs out of the system so that we can have money to reinvest back into the community and invest in that continuum of care. But, we're going to be at risk, right? The hospitals are going to end up being the insurance companies at some level. And we're not, we're getting better at it, but that's not what we've done over the years, to your point. We've been in the fee-for-service model. So I think that the conversation and the relationships in this community particularly are very strong, and that the continuum of care that we need to develop to get to more population health risk-based payment, the foundation's there. We just need to change that incentive without turning these organizations upside down. That's the trick, right? So the trick is financially trying to make that transition without taking away the high tertiary quaternary, or harming, I should say, the high tertiary quaternary services that we particularly, as a trauma center, deal with, and making sure that we have payment adequacy for that as we make that transition. I don't think anybody argues with changing the model. I think it's just making sure we don't turn these organizations upside down.
Yeah, before we go to Jody, I'll say, that's actually, as I mentioned, the first question I asked these leaders when I met them earlier is what percentage of your payers are already converted? Because in many parts of the country, it's less than 20. And we can stand up here and say everybody's invested, everybody's transitioning, but if it's going to put yourself out of business, you can't move that quickly. And so the point you made is similar to the one I made earlier, that you really have to look and see what percentage of your payers are in an APM, alternative payment model, before you fully make that transition and be aware. Is it interesting that our old stat was we would count admissions per 100 in the ED or admission per 1,000 to drive our volume, and now we look at admissions per 1,000 in our ED to make sure we're not overspending our own money. It's the same stat, but for the reverse model, right? So, Jody, tell us a little bit about the care continuum from your perspective.
Yeah, so at the risk of, and I don't want to be redundant, so you talk about managing access to appropriate care. And one of the slides or points that you made is I think that really starts with preventative care and the partnering back with the community. So how do you keep people healthy? So it's when Tom was saying you flip it, and I think you said it as well, it's about the start, not the finish, as much as anything as we think about it. And so how are we doing, how are we better partnering? And it's that entire continuum of care that truly, truly matters. So for us, it's been a journey. I could speak for Collide Health and Great Lakes Health, and for your benefit, Great Lakes Health is the partnership between ECMC Collide and the University of Buffalo. But when you think about the system has historically been fragmented, as you've mentioned, and it's very difficult for patients to navigate. And it's even more difficult, I would tell you, for primary care physicians to navigate our system as they take care of their patients. So how do they communicate? The patient really has no idea, quite honestly, how a primary care physician at some level navigates them to a higher level or more appropriate level of care. So lots of work being done. I still say, how do we keep people healthy? How do we stay on the front end? And then I think it was one of your slides where you said the hospital of the future. As we think about it, as we think about what we're going to look like, and obviously care gets delivered and is being even more delivered out into the community, more so than hospitals, that's a good thing. At home, it's a great thing. So we continually talk like that. But the hospital of the future needs to be there for those instances that very, very high end, those very sick, those very complex cases. And that's it. So it's the movement out. I just want to touch on one more thing that Tom mentioned, and we talk about this at our board level. It's the threading of the needle of the timing and the sequence of it. To your point that you just made, I'm glad you made it. It is, we can go and transform tomorrow and be out of business the next day. and so our responsibilities, as you know, from being a CEO and an executive is thousands of people get affected by those moves. So it's the threading of that. And I think what you've seen, I would say recently, is are we at the pace we should? Probably not. We're never at the pace we should. Is it quicker than it was yesterday? I think it is.
Yeah, for sure it is. All right.
You have the benefit of going last.
I do. All this wisdom.
All right, CJ, same question.
He's going to agree with everything.
Well, you know, as I was thinking about this panel, I often thought, what the heck am I doing up here with these guys? Because I'm just a country administrator. I'm down in South Buffalo, and I'm very focused on the hospital. But as I started to think about this idea of the continuum, I have to agree with Nora, at least, where she brings up, I was focused on, okay, acute care, and then we move beyond that, home care, long-term care, subacute. But the continuum really needs to be everything. It has to be community health. I came across these very interesting statistics. Back 20 years ago, 45% of the healthcare expenditure was hospital-centric. Now it's 32%. If you think about, and you had a lot to say about the emergency department and observation cases, there's something called ambulatory sensitive conditions where, you know, could these patients be handled better in the community or in some kind of alternate location? If you take those conditions, the number of patients that are in those, as well as the observation, and if you can move them out of the hospital, that's another 25% of the admissions in the patients that we see. So the continuum has to move from a hospital-centric to, I think, the full community. I also agree with Jody here in the fact that hospitals, and Tom, you got to somehow figure out how do we make this transition but retain the high-end cases that only the hospitals can do. And the hospitals counted on the revenue from those readmissions and from those observation cases and all the other work that we do. So the pace is important as we readjust where the revenues are coming from. Quite frankly, we can't put at risk the high-end services that we all provide. So maybe those prices have to go up, but we won't do some of the other things. Many of the staff members of our facilities and others in the community have sent some folks to Harvard for some executive training. And one of the books that they brought back was a book by Baumer. And it was very interesting to me. He was quite focused on recognizing, he was really talking about physicians, but reserving physicians for only the care that they were best suited for, rather than all the quick well visits and the calls in the middle of the night to fill a prescription. Save them for the patients that are falling off the care path, off the traditional approach. And I think that's what we've got to turn and think about for hospitals. Let's save the really high cost hospital care for those individuals that only the hospital and that expertise can provide, and recognize, and we got to figure out how to do this without going broke as hospitals, recognize that maybe some of this other care would be better served in other entities.
It's neat that the conversations and the statistics that we're looking at now are so different than they were 5 and 10 years ago. And one of the emerging practices, and you just kind of hit on the opposite end, it used to be the emergency department of wasteful spending, and now they're honing in, and we talk about this in my new book, Health Well, about primary care, and how primary care overutilization is now the biggest chunk. And so some new models, direct primary care, and some other things are emerging that will probably be the next frontier after the hospital's wasteful spending. So I'm really glad you made that point. The second question, and Nora, we'll just start down here with you again, is what incentives will be created to facilitate the coordination of post-acute care in Western New York?
Well, there are incentives already at the federal, state, and local level. So you already mentioned some of the federal incentives with the chronic care management and the transitions care management that are there. And you're saying that they're not money makers, but they're starting to be.
They're great services.
Yes, they're great services, and this is where you can see the healthcare systems partnering with community-based organizations in order to really make that transition work and to be able to tap into what Medicare is able to pay. Medicare is also reimbursing for, in Part B and MACRA, right? There's new rules are evolving to support these partnerships with community-based organizations. So there's some incentives there. NCQA, the National Committee for Quality Assurance, is developing incentives for person and family-centered care and developing standards around that. And soon these are going to be implemented, and you're going to have to focus on how are you addressing those person-centered cares and capturing that and showing the outcomes that you're actually delivering that. So these are going to be the carrot and the stick incentives. And then also NCQA is developing standards for community-based organizations so that health insurance plans and hospitals can be guaranteed that when they partner with a community-based organization, they're getting a quality standard because they've been accredited by NCQA. And NCQA is recommending standards for the delivery of services in the home as well. And then we've got the Health Resources and Services Administration. They're testing new models now called the GWEPs, the Geriatric Workforce Enhancement Programs. And there's 21 of them around the country where you've got partnerships with academic health centers, primary care groups, and community-based organizations. So this is a wave. So we're going to see more federal dollars being put to test partnerships, new payment systems, and these are going to create new incentives for hospitals and healthcare systems and insurance plans to take a look at. As regarding the state, in New York State, at the beginning of this year, hospitals and managed care organizations are required to identify one social determinant of health and to partner with a community-based organization in order to address that. And there's an incentive there, and there's actual additional funding that will go to that partnership for to cover the startup costs for that. Also, the New York State created a best practice guidelines to show how these partnerships can work and what you can expect from community-based organizations. And the New York State Office for the Aging has contracted with this Aging and Disability Business Institute in order to bring technical assistance to community-based organizations in New York State and training them how to partner with health systems. The Health Foundation for Western and Central New York actually was part of this Aging and Disability Business Institute and is supporting the Western New York Integrated Care Collaborative, which is one of the pioneering collaboratives for community-based organizations. And they're partnering with ECMC now, right, in the chronic disease self-management and falls prevention. So we're already beginning to see partnerships here. And this will continue. So the Health Foundation is looking for opportunities to convene groups, to provide technical assistance, to bring groups together in order to learn more about how to partner with community-based organizations and how to test those financial payment systems, which is going on in California, and how to bring some of that here so that we can learn from that and spread the learnings and best practices. So these are some of the incentives that I just wanted to mention.
So for those of you who aren't as deep in community health as everyone, the National Committee for Quality Assurance is NCQA, just in case that came up a few times in that answer. Can you, before we move to Tom, you mentioned at lunch today something that I thought was really important, that the federal government has set aside funds for local area on aging and other organizations to partner with hospitals. Because we talked about there's really not a whole lot of incentive, I think we covered that pretty thoroughly in the last hour, for hospitals to jump in with community-based organizations from a financial perspective. So the Fed stepped in and said, let's give you some tools. Can you just talk about that for a minute, that program?
Yes, so the Administration for Community Living, formerly the Administration on Aging, is partnering with the National Association of Area Agencies on Aging and the American Society on Aging and the National Disabilities groups as well. And through federal funding, through the Older Americans Act, but also a consortium of foundations are also funding this. So across the country, foundations are supporting this and to bring technical assistance across the country. This is open to anybody to be able to take aginganddisabilitybusinessinstitute.org, and they can participate in the webinars, participate in the training. And you see more, Deloitte actually just did a study on the partnerships between healthcare and community-based organizations that show now that you see 80% of health systems are starting to look at partnering with community-based organizations to address the social determinants of health. And most of these organizations are partnering with community-based organizations in order to do this. What Deloitte has also found is that foundations, and there's the conversion foundation, so like the Health Foundation, where there were health plans that converted to a foundation, all across the country now are actually looking at how they can be supportive of these partnerships. So it's happening in Colorado, in California, New Hampshire, and Maine, and anywhere, and it's happening here, right in our own backyard.
So that's a great lead-in to ask three hospital executives, what incentives are there for you as hospitals to engage with community-based providers?
Let me start.
Yeah,
I think obviously the Medicaid waiver has been, I think, a great incentive for us to change the way we behave. I think we do, as I think about the last question, we actually have 4 navigators in our ER right now, which we have no financial incentive to have them in there because they're pushing people out back into the community.
An expense in the hospital.
Right, it's an expense. But although we are reimbursed through the Medicaid waiver, but I think our folks in the ER probably looked at us a little strange when we first decided we were going to do that because it's actually taking revenue out of the institution. But we're, to Jody's point and CJ's point, we're trying to get to the long-term goal and be prepared. So as this transitions, we're ready for it. But we don't, as long as we don't turn our institutions upside down. So, I think there aren't enough incentives to do that. Let me just start by saying that. And the second piece is we do need to get people home. We do way too much, other types of care in the community, long-term care or intermediate care, subacute, whatever the case may be. But we also don't think right. So in the United States, we spend, I think it's Commonwealth did a study, we spend 16% of our GDP on health care, which is the highest of any high-income country. We spend 9% on social programs, which you think about all the social programs we have, and you would say, well, I guess we spend a lot more than other countries. We don't. So we don't view health care as that whole bucket. And so we spend less than all the other countries do on social programs and housing, retirement programs, on and on and on. So we're beginning to think of it differently. To your point in your examples that you were using with your family members, because we've never looked at it like that, and we haven't been paid for it. Yeah. That's the other side of it, right? Sure. So we're only paid for the medical care, not all the other pieces of it. So, if they flipped us to capitation tomorrow, which is almost the Canadian model at some level, if you think about it, we would behave differently very quickly. Sure. We might also go bankrupt, but that's where we have to start challenging ourselves to think of, so that we can get ready for that. And then the interplay, again, between the insurance companies and the hospitals and how that's going to work. Because if they really do want to put to your point I think you made when you were speaking about the insurance companies being at risk, if they really want to put us at risk, we're then operating like an insurance company. So many, as you know, many hospital systems have either started insurance companies or partnered with insurance companies to be able to get ready for that. So I think at the end of the day, there aren't enough incentives to do that, but it's beginning to change. We just need them to do that sooner rather than later to change those incentives, and then at the same time just make sure we have enough payment to be able to make that transition.
It's like the example I gave of nursing homes. Hospitals' behaviors changed overnight in April when all of a sudden they were paying for nursing home care, bundle payments. In the state of Maryland, when they went to just the flat rate model, where essentially they said, hey, hospital A, you get this much for the year, hospital B, you get this much for the year, overnight they became insurers. And that's really what this question is about, is we have this long, murky path to value-based care. Do hospitals want to transform? Of course they do. Is there a financial incentive? Very small ones. And the third consideration, the most important one, is are we going to put ourselves out of business before we get there? Right. And that's really what this question is. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
And so there's, as you talk about those value-based programs, and Tom says there's not enough incentive, and there clearly isn't. And again, it's back to pace of change and so on. There's more today than there was yesterday, and we'll continue to do that. I think there's one point that I'd like to make. Josh, you asked the question earlier about why wouldn't you have done that? I forget at which point you said that. I think it was around a discharge planning kind of question. Here's the reality about the partnership with the community in order to achieve the goal. If we're true, and I believe we are true, to two overarching fundamental goals and strategies and actual, as far as our mission goes, it's highest quality at the lowest cost. Well, not everything is quantifiable on the front end. So the partnership with the community, in order to be at the highest quality and at the lowest cost, you have to have those partnerships. There's no other way of achieving that. If you're true to that goal and those goals, which will lead you to the better tomorrow, then you have to do that. The other thing I did want to mention as well, in doing that, and I'm glad, again, that you had mentioned this in your talk, which was the system think perspective. You have to be a system. You have to have all the requisite parts and pieces in order to really achieve it. So it's no longer just a hospital. It needs to be a healthcare system. So we talk now in terms of the system, and the system needs to be each and every piece and part of that. So that you're talking about urgent care centers, you're talking about primary care physicians, you're talking about clinics, you're talking about community partnerships, and that all, for the most part that I just mentioned, is out in the community. It's not in the hospital.
So you talk about what's the incentive. I really don't think, and I've said this for a while, and it keeps becoming more and more expensive, I don't think the country, we as citizens, can afford the health care that we can all provide. So there's got to be something we do differently. And when I think about the community and all the partners, I think we've got to turn things on its head. I was researching some stuff, and I found this very interesting statistic. 87% of the healthcare expenditure is related to chronic conditions. So then there's another stat. 75% of those conditions are based upon our lifestyles. It's smoking, it's lack of exercise, it's our fondness for the chicken wings and other things.
Why is he staring at me when he says all of that?
So, if we're going to think about how to reduce or make healthcare affordable and really move into health, I think we've got to figure out some way to engage the citizens, maybe through our systems or maybe through partnerships with the community, but somehow people have to take responsibility for their own health because they can make a difference, and that's where the costs are.
So what you just described is what I call an EHC, an engaged healthcare consumer. And just like when you buy a house, you shop neighborhoods and school districts, and you buy a car, you shop features. In healthcare, and I think I mentioned this earlier, we feel not only disempowered to shop, we feel embarrassed to ask our physician for a second opinion. Until we engage in the process, you're exactly right, it's not going to change.
And Josh, there's one other thing that we've got to deal with as a society, and that's palliative care and hospice care. It's end-of-life care. We have to have those conversations before they end up in our emergency department.
Absolutely. We've got to find funding for those things. Before we go to the last question, we're going to do a little, the first person, because I don't want to put you on the spot, I'm going to put you on the spot. The first person who can go to my LinkedIn page and tell me what the four things are is going to get a free copy of my new book. So can you tell everybody what you told me today about, I remember the name, 3450.
Right.
And the first person that gets the four things on my LinkedIn page is going to get a free book. So tell us what 3450 is.
All right. Thank you for giving me that opportunity. And CJ, thank you for bringing that up about the health behaviors. 3 health behaviors have an impact on 4 chronic conditions that result in 50% of all deaths.
Okay, we're going to say that again. Go
3 health behaviors have an impact on 4 health chronic conditions that result in 50% of all deaths.
And this is a national movement, and you do know the 3 behaviors, right?
I remembered them.
Okay.
Smoking, proper nutrition, and physical activity.
All right. And there are 4 conditions
4
they lead to,
conditions.
which we're unaware of, but we still think it's really cool.
Diabetes.
We guessed at what they were, but you can tell us what they are.
Chronic health conditions.
All right, so we're going to move to the last, but that's a really cool program she shared with me today, and I'm going to do some research on it because I think it's probably a great way to simplify a big problem.
And we'll be working on that, so we'll talk.
Yeah.
Because it's a new initiative of the Health Foundation that we're taking a look at this to emulate what San Diego County's doing, the state of Vermont, and Pittsburgh.
We're networking right here on stage.
See that?
Look at that. Creating business
That's what a
opportunities.
social worker does.
Yeah. So our last question is kind of a funner one than the others. And the question is, and Nora, we'll start here and work our way down again. Describe the role that new technologies will hold in the development of quality-driven healthcare systems. And I want to make one point, and you guys have figured out that I'm a little condescending and a little more provocative than most. What other industry do we improve technology without reducing costs? It's healthcare. We introduced this great new technology, and it's great because hospitals can charge more for it. Remember, I'm one of them when I say that, right? So we're going to talk about technology and how it can improve the continuum and achieve the triple aim. And you hit 2 of the triple aim earlier, highest quality, lowest cost. So let's talk about technology and how it can improve the continuum.
Well, again, I'm going to talk about bringing health into the home.
I'm
and how can technology do that? So, of course, there's telehealth, right? That's one thing. But we need to bring what can be done inside the home so that people who cannot get to the hospital, or it wouldn't be advisable for them to get to the hospital, to be at home, to receive an assessment, and to receive the care in the home. So how can technology do that? Telehealth, there's some handheld devices. Home meds is one of them, where a non-clinical worker can go into the home, look at all the medicine that person is having in the home, from over-the-counter, prescription, foreign medicines, herbal medicine that they got from their neighbor, and then put that all in, and it's evidence-based. It'll go directly to a pharmacist, send out alerts if there's contraindication in there, and also send alerts out to the physician to come out. So this is a way to capture where people are either under-medicated, over-medicated, or wrongly medicated, and to help in the home. The other thing that I just want to mention about technology, though, because when we talk about technology, and we need to have the capability for the data collection so that we can understand we're measuring what we should be measuring. We're collecting that information, and we're able to analyze that, and we're able to get an idea of the outcomes and the return on investments. And this information needs to be shared in real time with primary care, with hospitals, with the workers in the home who's providing the services in the home. So we need to have some way to have technology be multi-dimensional, multi-use, and a lot of the community-based organizations aren't capable of actually paying for that at this point. But I think that we need, but we're looking at software now. There are foundations across the country that are looking at software development where we can share this with the home-based organizations and the hospital systems. And I think we need to look at how we can, as you said, broaden it out, be more inclusive, and share the technology and bring more advanced care into the home.
Tom?
Yeah, I think that when we talk about technology, and especially the consumer, we have to be careful that we're not leaving people behind. And, you know, the patients that many of us see in the community, Dr. Vasquez, Joanne, many other community organizations, you know, not only can the community, obviously, organizations not afford them, but the people that are using them can't afford them, or in many cases need a lot of help with healthcare literacy. So, we talk in the country in kind of broad terms about technology and how we're going to use technology for patients, but there's a lot of variability in ability to pay for those resources, who's going to pay for those resources, how are those folks going to use that technology. And so, as we move in technology, I just think we have to be really careful we don't leave a certain segment of the population behind, because we're trying to get back to the financial incentive, get to the place where we're trying to get more consumers, patients. So that's going to be the challenge. And if we're capitating ourselves, then you're going to start to look to reduce costs, but it's going to be expensive in some instances around technology to do that. And one comment, yes, we do charge more for technology, but they charge us more to buy it. So so that needs to be regulated too. But I just wanted to make that point within that context. Obviously, there's a lot of other things we could say about technology, but I think we just have to really think through the other social side of it, and how we're dealing with that to make sure people receive the right care and receive the right information around that. So.
I remember when I was a hospital CEO, I was buying a new MRI machine, and one of the companies came in, and there were 7 people there, and all I could think about is, how much extra am I paying for you for, and what exactly do you do? And of course, they all had an explanation why they were there, but it didn't make sense to me. It didn't make me feel any better.
It's like it's construction on the throughway.
Yeah. I think what they were saying is, I got to justify being here, right? So, Jody, tell us about technology.
So let me add to that, and let me add it from kind of the health system side and obviously the provider side. So having great data, having predictive analytics will ensure and really help and aid in the lowering of costs and being proactive in the care for the patient. Now, you have to, as you say that, you have to, believe it, and you have to invest heavily to get there. And again, I go back to not everything in healthcare can really be quantifiable at the onset. In this instance, it's that data, it's those analytics that will help on the front end, that will be proactive, that will keep people from entering hospitals, because the physicians and the caregivers will be able to read that and be able to use that as their tool to advance the health of those patients. I do think, and I think we all would agree on this, from a technology perspective, healthcare is, again, fragmented. We run a very large system in Buffalo, in Western New York, in the region, and we're on multiple systems the physicians are on multiple systems, having to click on multiple buttons to get information. And it's all of that. So we're behind the curve when it comes to that. So as we have multiple affiliations throughout the community, Hospital A will be on Cerner, Hospital A will be on Meditech, Hospital B and D and C will be on something else. And so it's very challenging. The reality, though, is it's, to me, and we probably didn't talk enough about this today, it's the education of the future of healthcare to everyone, that these are the investments that we have to make. Those are not brick and mortar investments. Those are investments to coordinate care across a region, across a system. And, I'm one to always say it starts with the belief. It has to be a belief in doing that. So for me, the technology piece, I agree with all that was said, especially with Tom and the telemedicine and all the things that we are doing some of those things. But I think about, I'm staring at Dr. Vasquez and thinking about just how do you have that data, those analytics, so that you can be proactive in the care for the patients, which will eliminate that readmission, them coming back, and so on and so forth.
I get a chance to work with doctors all day long, and when I need care, I don't want to go to the doctor. So I think technology, I think in healthcare, we've got to catch up with other industries. I really don't want to go to the doctor's office. So give me an app on my cell phone that I can go through, that kind of follows me through. Okay, I screwed up my knee. Where does it hurt? Here's some pictures. Point this out. And then essentially tell me, do I have to go do I really need to go to the ER and then follow up with my physician or my orthopod 3 days later, if I'm lucky to get into them? Or can I go out and get a brace, which I actually had down cellar? And is it the right brace? And, you know, I want to be able to take control of my health care. It is so hard for even me to get access to the specialists. I can't imagine what it's like for the public to be able to do that. So I think if we can give more power, more information to the community and engage them in their wellness and, you know, try to take care of themselves a little bit more, I think that's where technology needs to go. And then I think, Tom, you mentioned, you know, big data and all of this AI stuff. I think that's how healthcare in the hospitals will be better served.
All right, so we are out of time, but I want to end this mystery. And where's Dr. Catherine Griswold? Thank you. We were texting while we were doing this, just so you know. She was destined to get you guys the information you wanted. So the 3-4-50, and if you want to Google this later, 3-4-50 framework, as Nora mentioned, San Diego County came up when I Googled it. Tobacco use, diet, and lifestyle. 3 things that lead to 4 conditions, which are diabetes, respiratory disease, cardiovascular, and cancer. Lead to 50% of deaths, including premature deaths. I think that's an awesome way to, and they're doing some great work in San Diego. So, Dr. Griswold, I am going to be mailing you, if you catch me outside and give me your address, a copy of this book, because I'm going to give this one to Nora for her foundation being willing to sponsor this so we can all be here today. Thank you. And you're all going to get a copy of this, and I'm going to meet you outside that door in a minute, and we're going to hang out for an hour or so and have some fun and get to know each other. The first 10 people that go to Amazon and do a review of this, I will mail a free copy of this. Okay? Trying to drive those up. So, Nora, this is for you. Can you join me in thanking our panelists?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So we'll meet you out in the lobby. No, hold on. Hold tight. 30 seconds.
Oh.
Yeah, I
There
think
you
we have a little bit of. I think we have a little bit of time for a couple of questions from the audience.
Oh, sorry about that.
Yep. We've got, so if you have a question and you want to raise your hand, we've got a couple of people with mics that will come around, and as long as you raise it high enough, our identifier is in the back, so raise it high so she could see and send a microphone over to you.
And if you do have to leave early, please grab a book on your way out. They're outside.
you a
First
microphone?
question in the back.
First, Josh, thank you for your comments on the state of the sickness care system. But more importantly, CJ, thank you for your balance in bringing prevention and health promotion. So, Nora, I have a recommendation. This is Phil Haberstroh from the Wellness Institute. I'd love to see the foundations in the region measure social capital.
Yeah.
We haven't done that yet. That would make a large contribution to our ability to create health. And for Tom and Jody and CJ, hire a health economist. We don't have one in the region that will give you the data that you need to support the policy. A couple of thoughts. Thank you.
All right. We're networking.
All right.
We're networking, right? So, another question. Right here.
Yeah. Am I ready?
You're ready.
Dr. Vesquez. I brought my own mic. The issue that lies ahead is healthcare is moving really slow compared to 2 other industries that are going to really hurt us. And one is retail and one is IT. What do you foresee in the future? Because we're saying we don't have the economic means, but you're bringing in players that have the means, the ideas, and they're pretty experts in certain areas. So what do you see around the country in the future? You're a futurist. In terms of, because these systems don't understand what's going to hit them. And what's going to happen is we're going to have closure of hospitals like never before in the next 3 to 5 years. And it's kind of sad because I'm seeing it in Tennessee. I'm seeing it in Alabama. It's going to hit us. And so how do you prepare us for that tsunami?
It's already hitting us. And so, I don't think I answered the question of what is a healthcare futurist. People started calling me that first, so I just figured I better come up with a definition. So I read articles like you guys do. I get 7 newsletters a day. I headline grab, and if I think it's relevant, I share it on LinkedIn or Twitter and put my spin on it for 1 or 2 sentences. So I can share with you, here's what I took from this article to be relevant. And so as I do that, I think about how it's going to impact you. As a hospital executive, as a physician, as a nursing home, as opposed to as a community-based provider, I say, here's the truth in what I read. A lot of people, other than calling me a healthcare futurist, they call me lots of names, but they call me a truth teller as well. But I will tell you, last year I got asked a question, because in this book, you're all going to read it, right? There's 3 chapters on how big electronic medical record companies are actually running the hospitals. They have bootstrapped our hospitals to the point that they can't do the things they want to do because of budgets and timelines and great innovations. I've seen so many people bring great innovations to the table, and as soon as you meet one of these folks in the hallway and pitch it to them, they go back tomorrow and say, I saw this great innovation. I don't like to mention them by name because I don't want to get sued, but the big 3 companies that run all of our big hospitals with electronic medical records go, hey, thanks for mentioning that to me. We'll check it out. We have something that does that. And then they never bring it up again because they don't have to. Because big EMR is running our hospitals. And last year I was asked a question about, well, how's that ever going to stop? How are you ever going to be healthy at home? My exact answer got answered this year when Apple and Microsoft said, oh, who's Epic? Who's Cerner? We're a little bigger than them. We're going to put your electronic medical record in your hand. And by the way, the early feedback on Apple's partnership with big health systems is really good. People are saying, I dig it. I'm getting access to my medical record. It's amazing how a big international technology company can make us forget about these 3 companies that are bootstrapping our healthcare system. But remember this. Who pays those big EMR companies that are crippling? It's like they're committing suicide, right? I mean, the hospitals are paying the same organizations that are keeping them from growing. So why would the EMR company have any incentive to keep you healthy and at home when the person paying their bills has 0 incentive to keep you healthy at home? So I'm just pointing out things that nobody really wants to talk about. But when you start thinking about Apple putting in your hand, Microsoft's got some things coming. I didn't even think about Amazon, but man, they're the biggest company in the world. And I'll go on the record and say, you're exactly right. And I think I said that earlier. I'm going to write an article soon about who's going to own hospitals. Because as soon as they figure out they're a cost center and not an expense, the hospital systems are already changing their name to health and hospital systems, right? Because they see what's coming. So somebody's got to step in. In the rural area, it's got to be the states. In the local area, is Amazon going to be the largest provider of health insurance 5 years from now? I'm all for it because maybe it'll be more affordable. Maybe Walmart, Humana will compete with them. That's a lot better proposition than the 4 companies that have managed this being all by themselves, right? So I agree with you, and I think it's coming, and I think it's up to Apple, and I think it's up to Microsoft, and I think it's up to you becoming an EHC, an engaged healthcare consumer. Engage in the process just like you would if you're buying a house or buying a car. Next question.
Hi, my name is Mark Shahada. I'm a med student about to enter into residency. And I had a question for
Are you reconsidering that after seeing me?
I know what I'm getting into. So I have a question for the hospital administrators on the panel. So specifically about resident education, it's often quoted that teaching services tend to be higher costs because as residents are less confident, they order more tests or less likely to discharge patients in a timely fashion. Going forward, as you face more scrutiny from payers about what services are necessary, level of care, how do you propose balancing the need to lower costs with the need to provide high-quality education?
You want to start that one?
You want to?
No, go ahead. You're the largest teacher.
So
I'm happy to do it.
So one of the things is in predominantly our physicians are from the university. So as a teaching hospital, as an academic health center, what we need to do is better partner with the university, quite honestly, in how they begin the process to understand. Because I'll give you a couple examples of things. The old school way of how a physician comes into the hospital setting or the hospital world, I think needs to change dramatically. And from a business perspective, quite honestly, from a how to behave perspective, how to perform perspective. So it's really on the front end, in my mind, with working with the university, with working with the med school, with working with how do we better educate our students as to what's important. Back to the conversation we had here, what's necessary, what isn't necessary. The other part to that is who's teaching them. So as they come to and you use millennials and Gen X and so on, but there is a discrepancy between a certain generation and another generation as to what gets ordered, what doesn't get ordered, and how they've always done business. So to me, it's, no pun intended, it's more of an education process.
And I think it's going to become less hospital-focused, right? So we're talking about the community and really getting the physicians to understand the relationship with the community, meaning obviously the physicians that we have now, but obviously the new physicians that are coming up in residency programs. And that's a different mindset, right, of not being hospital-centric, and it's going to be a challenge. And that the social determinants of health is healthcare. So that's another foreign concept, so to speak. Just as an anecdote, so obviously this community knows we had one of the largest cyber attacks in U.S. history at our institution. And I think as we're talking about technology, I think paper charting is going to be very important because none of the residents know how to paper chart. So the older physicians were teaching the residents how to paper chart, and just something to keep in the back of our head about technology when it does go down. But it was an interesting dynamic in our institution to see which the folks that really knew how to do something when literally the computers were paperweights.
And before I left the C-suite, I noticed too, to take that to another level, do you know who the hospital leadership is? It isn't young residents, it's doctors that have been there forever. Right. So they're discouraging innovation and the new physicians from implementing their practices because they don't want to learn, right? Old habits die hard. I would encourage you in the book you're going to get, there's a chapter called Quota-Based Physicianing. And it talks about how, like any other business, doctors need to see as many widgets per day as they can to make X amount of dollars per year to take home and live the way they want to. And I was speaking about quota-based physicianing about 4 years ago, and that's actually the first time CMS ever invited me back to speak. They said, hey, we've never really thought of it that way. I said, oh, you should come to my hospital. I'll introduce you to a few of these fee-for-service doctors. And all they're doing is, how many widgets am I going to see at this hospital? How many widgets can I send to the LTAC later today and bill every day for 25 days? And then after they're done there, how many of those widgets can I send to a nursing home for 21 more days? And I'll give you kind of the punchline for that chapter. If you spend 5 days in a hospital, 25 in an LTAC, and 20 more in a nursing home, I had doctors that was their goal for your mom, whether she needed it or not. And because you weren't willing to question it, they were meeting their quota, and the household income looked good, but your mom just spent 2 months in an institution that she didn't need to be in at all.
Josh, one more thing. I'm sorry for...
No, go for it.
But I think you made a great point when you were talking about the different generations. The reality of today is back to who's teaching who. So you have a huge gap, generational gap. The other thing is it's a lifestyle situation too as well. And we face this a lot. And I'll go back to my ECMC days when I sat with the head of the American College of Surgeons who talked to me about the trauma surgeons. And at the time, we had 4 or 5 trauma surgeons. And he put me in a room by myself and he said, I just want to tell you something. You're going to need 8 to do the work of 4. And it's not a slant, it's not a negative to the new physicians. It's a different world. It's a different lifestyle. The expectations are different. And it's all of that. So the whole process, and we've had that conversation. I've had that conversation with the president of the university. I've had that conversation with the dean. And it's a learning process. So academia needs to learn better about us and the expectations and the needs of what goes on inside the system. And then we also need to better know and understand what the needs and expectations and desires are of the students.
Well, thank you again for attending tonight. I'm sorry we have to end here. There was a lot of good discussion. Thank you, audience members, for your attendance and your engagement. Thank you to our keynote speaker, Dr. Josh Luke. Thank you to our panelists, Nora O'Brien-Surik, Tom Quattrochi, Jody Lomeo, and CJ Erlab. Thank you so much for attending tonight. Dr. Luke will be signing books in the front, so go talk with him there. Have some dessert and refreshments and coffee. Stay around and network and chit-chat. Thank you.